The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone. Here's Jonathan, and once again, I will be your host for today's webinar. So, to everyone that has been following this webinar series that we've been doing for quite a while now, welcome back, and thank you for joining us if this is your first time as well. So we feel very lucky today to have such a big name on our session, and I'm talking about trainer, author, and speaker Bruce Silver from Method and Style. But before giving control to Bruce, let me just go quickly over a few things. First, I'll just take a couple minutes to present Trisotech. That is because there is an intimate relationship between Bruce's work at Method and Style and Trisotech software tools. After that, Bruce will step in and present today's session on BPMN modeling. During the course of his presentation, you may have some questions for Bruce. If so, please use the questions widget of the GoToWebinar control panel that you can easily locate on your screen. We should have some time at the end to answer most of the questions, but if we don't, we'll make sure to follow up with you guys in response to any interrogation. Last thing, we are currently recording the webinar, which means you will have access to it later on. So don't worry if you miss any part or if you have to leave early. There will be an email with all the relevant links that you will receive later on. So very briefly, for those that might not know Trisotech, we are a software solution provider. The tool is called the Digital Enterprise Suite and is composed of various components, as you can see at the bottom of the slide here, all of which are helping organizations not only to become more efficient, but also more agile in delivering customer experience. So it's a very wide range of modeling tools. But today, you will see a lot from the Trisotech BPMN modeler. As you probably presume, this tool enables you to model your processes, your business processes, and drive process improvement initiatives using the recognized standard business process model and notation. A feature of the BPM modeler is that you can validate your models based on method and style directly in the modeler. And you also have access to on-demand training while using the tool. So that helps you build the best models possible according to method and style. The method and style training is available either live or on demand via Bruce's website. And if you're lucky enough to live in beautiful Montreal, you can also register to the on-site training at the Trisotech office. So we do provide this as well here at the Montreal head office. These links will be provided to you all as well within the follow-up email that you should receive either later on today or tomorrow. So look for that in your inbox. So here's our panelist. I don't think Bruce needs any further presentation. He's been one of the dominant figures in the BPM space, for many years. He's behind a lot of resources like BPM Essentials and obviously BPM Method and Style. Bruce is also providing training in the decision management field. His latest book, the DMN Cookbook, is the definitive reference and guidebook to implementing the new decision modeling standard, DMN standing for Decision Model and Notation. So enough for me. So enjoy the presentation. Bruce, I'm giving you control, and have a great session, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
There we go. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm Bruce Silver, and you may have heard of Method and Style, but not sure what it is, so you will find out in the next half hour or so. We'll talk about BPMN modeling using Method and Style. So BPMN has been around for 15 years, and there's a lot of it out there. There's a very large quantity of BPMN models out there. It's probably what most people use who are trying to model their processes, but most of it is bad. It fails BPMN's most fundamental purpose, which is to communicate the process logic, what's happening in the process, clearly to people that don't already know it. This diagram here is an example, and it's from the BPMN website on omg.org in a document called BPMN 2.0 by example. And I call it a good example of how not to do it. So everything in this diagram, presumably, is legal according to the standard, but it's bad. Now, you might say, isn't BPMN just a flowchart? And when BPMN was first created 15 years ago, the people that created it wanted something that would be accepted by business users and business analysts. And they looked at the existing standards at that time, things like UML, activity charts, and things like that. And they concluded they were all developer standards, not accepted by business. And they asked business people, what does a process diagram, process model look like to you? And they said, a swim lane flowchart. This has boxes and arrows, and the boxes representing actions, and the arrows represent sequence in time. And the boxes are arranged in what look like the lanes of a swimming pool to indicate the actor performing the actions. So BPMN said, yes, we will adopt that basic look. And that was a very smart thing that they did, because in the 15 years since then, BPMN has been widely accepted and adopted by business users, not just by developers. It's used by developers as well, but by business users because it's familiar. And flowcharts and BPMN models have the same purpose, basic purpose, which is to communicate to a group, to the stakeholders, how the process works, the process logic, visually through diagrams. But BPMN diagrams are not the same as traditional flowcharts. They have some fundamental differences. The most important of which is this, that in a flowchart, whether you use, let's say, PowerPoint or Visio cross-functional flowchart, or even Visio with a free BPMN stencil that has the shapes. Those are drawing tools. Those tools don't know what the shapes mean. They expect you to know what they mean. And you, being a business person and maybe not trained, you think you know what they mean, but you don't exactly know what they mean, or what you think they mean today isn't exactly what you thought they meant yesterday, or not what your colleague thinks they mean. That's flowcharting. It's vague. BPMN is not vague. The shapes, and as modified by various icons and markers and symbols, have a very specific meaning, which is spelled out in a specification like you see here. And there are rules about what can connect to what and what those connections mean. So there's the possibility that your model contains violations of the rules. It's invalid. That's a big difference. With BPMN, the meaning of the diagram doesn't depend on the tool you used to create it or your own sort of feelings that day about what the shapes mean. It means what it means. It means what the spec says it means. A second difference, BPMN is inherently hierarchical. So a process model, a single process model, is not typically one diagram, but it is a hierarchy of diagrams, a set of diagrams. And the thing that makes it hierarchical is this concept called a subprocess. And a subprocess is simultaneously a single activity, shown with the little plus sign here, and a process, a flow from start to end. It's both of them at the same time. And it's not that the modeler has a choice of which way do I represent it in my model. The subprocess is represented both ways in the same model, in different levels of the diagram. So these levels have a hierarchical or parent to child relationship. So the way it works is when the solid arrow, the sequence flow is called, arrives in the parent level at a subprocess, it kind of starts what's inside the subprocess, which is in a separate diagram, typically hyperlinked in the tool to the parent level from the start of it. And when it gets to the end of the child level diagram, it immediately resumes on the outgoing sequence flow back at the parent. So the child level represents what's inside this single activity with the plus sign, the subprocess. So you might say, well, that seems like a lot of bother. Why? What's the value of all that extra stuff? Well, the value is if you can collapse significant chunks of your process into a single activity, you have the possibility of fitting your end-to-end cross-functional process on a single page. So you can understand it in its sort of high-level aspects as a single thing. And BPM, as a management discipline, asks you to understand your business in terms of these cross-functional, end-to-end cross-functional processes as a single thing. So the ability to collapse a lot of detail down to a single activity lets you collapse the end-to-end process down to a single page so you can understand it as a whole within the context of the fully detailed model. So with flowcharting, or say before we had BPMN, you'd have to create two models, a high-level view, high-level model, and a detailed model. And then as your understanding changes or the process itself evolves, you've got to keep those high-level views and detailed views in sync with each other. BPMN, you don't have to do that. There's one model with two views. There's a high-level view from the top-level diagram, and the detailed view that you see by drilling in into the child level. And the child level can have collapse subprocesses as well, so they could be grandchild level, et cetera. So you can capture the full detail of the model, of the process in your model, and still have this high-level view. The third difference from flowcharting is BPMN allows you to place a particular business process that you're modeling in a larger context, an enterprise context, or even inter-enterprise context by showing entities outside the process, such as the customer, such as other processes in your company, as these rectangles called black box pools. So represented abstractly. We can't really see what's in them, but we understand all the interactions that our process has with these external entities in two forms, these dashed lines called messages or message flows. Customer sends an order message to the process, and the process sends replenishment order message and gets a confirmation back, etc. That's kind of the main form of interaction with the outside world. And we also have this shape called a data store, which is shared data. So the customer posts his or her credit card information to their profile. You know, think about Amazon or iTunes or something like that. And then when the process needs to get the credit card, it goes retrieves it. So these are the two ways, message and shared data with a data store, that the outside world can pass information to a process. And you can see that all very compactly in the diagram itself. So it allows you to place your process in this more meaningful business context. The fourth difference from flowcharts is BPMN describes visually in the diagram event-triggered behavior. So the event shape is the circle in BPMN. And an event means a signal that something happened. And the icon inside the circle called the trigger is the type of signal. So this white envelope trigger means receiving a message flow. We saw the message flows here. And so BPMN lets you show in the diagram, well, what happens when a message flow arrives? And there are a number of things that you can say happens. You start a new instance of the process. Or here, you pause the process and resume when the message arrives. Here, you're doing some activity, and if the message arrives, you abort it, you interrupt it, and exit on this other path instead of taking the normal path. And this one, which looks very similar, except the border of the event is a dashed line instead of a solid line, means if the message arrives while the activity is running, you initiate whatever is on this so-called exception flow without terminating or aborting the original activity, and when it's done, it exits in parallel on the normal flow. So this event-triggered behavior with flowcharting, it's in the footnotes of your documentation, because this is really how exceptions are handled in your business. So it's maybe very important to understand that. That could be why the process succeeds or fails, but it's not in the diagram. BPMN puts it in the diagram. And why is that important? Because you want, I mean, nobody reads that 100 pages of documentation. You certainly can't share that with your, stakeholder team all at once. Diagrams, you can. You can gather around the table or show it on the screen, and everyone can argue about, is that how it really works? Is that how it should work? So understanding the process visually is much more valuable than capturing it in a text document. And event-triggered behavior in the diagram, that's a big difference from flowcharting. All right, now let's go back to the topic that we started with, bad BPMN. So what does bad BPMN mean? First, it means that the model uses the shapes and symbols incorrectly. That they don't mean what the modeler drew isn't his or her intent. Does not correctly describe the behavior. Number two, it does not clearly communicate what's happening. You could say, well, it's technically valid, but it's vague, it's imprecise. Two different people looking at that might come away with completely different ideas about what's happening in the process. This is the biggest complaint I get from managers of process mapping teams who invest a lot of time and money, mostly time, in these process mapping sessions, all the stakeholder workshops, and in the end, they find that the only people that really understand the diagrams are the people that created it. That fails the purpose. You want it to communicate clearly to anyone. Third aspect of bad BPMN is it's incomplete. You should be able to tell at a glance at the top level diagram, how the process starts, what the process instance represents, very important concept, how it possibly ends, its possible end states, and all its interactions with things outside, other processes, the customer, suppliers, etc. And fourth, bad BPMN is inconsistent. Ideally, given the same set of facts about how the process works, all the modelers in your team should create more or less the same diagram structure. If you can do that, you have a pretty good assurance that everyone in your team will understand each other's models, understand the meaning. So in contrast, good BPMN. What's good BPMN? Well, obviously it's correct according to the spec. That's a given. So when you validate your model against the rules of the spec, it says no errors. And I would say if you're using a tool that cannot do that, you're kind of wasting your time. You need that. But more than that, it should be clear. The meaning of the process should be evident to anyone from the printed diagrams alone, in particular those who don't already know how the process works. I mean, that's really the objective. Explaining to people that don't know how it works, exactly how it works, how it starts and ends, the order of the steps, even if they don't know the terminology that you use. So that's really important. Third, complete. So as I said, you should be able to tell at a glance how the process starts, its possible end states, what the instance represents, and all its interactions with the outside world. And it should be done consistently. As I said, given the same set of facts, you want everyone to create more or less the same process model. So I said, yes, BPMN has a spec. It has a standard, 500 plus pages, very lengthy spec. But that standard deals only with item number 1. It says nothing about 2, 3, and 4. That's a problem. So if you want to have additional rules or conventions or methodology to ensure 2, 3, and 4, they're in addition to the rules of the spec. And that's what method and style is. So it doesn't violate the rules of the spec, but you could think of it as additional constraints in methodology on top of the rules of the spec that are intended to create consistently good BPMN. So, as I said, it's a way to create consistently good BPMN. The style part of method and style are additional rules. You could think of them as grammar rules on top of the rules of the spec that are designed to make the meaning clear from the diagrams. And the methodology, which is not done in real time in your stakeholder workshops, but done kind of as a post process by the analyst, taking the notes from all those workshops and sort of reorganizing them to create a properly, consistently structured process model. So it will be understandable by anyone, but it's probably not the same diagrams that you would create in real time in those workshops at the whiteboard. Now, method and style, it's a learnable skill. It does not require technical expertise. It's not for developers, it's for business people, business analysts, business architects, and ordinary team members in the business. So no technical expertise is required, no experience, prior experience in process modeling is required. What it requires is a disciplined approach, following the rules. So I mean, business people like to be creative, and this is not a creative exercise. So method and style is not how to create a good process, like, you know, Lean or Six Sigma might be a methodology for doing that. So that's in parallel with this. This is method and style is just given a set of facts about how the process works, how do I capture that in diagrams that communicate that meaning perfectly, whether the process is good, bad, or indifferent. So as an example, let's take this and maybe we'll go into the tool. Let me go into the tool so you can see it here. Here we go. All right, so I'd say what does this diagram mean? From what business meaning does this communicate? I asked this question in my training. People say lots of stuff, but basically the answer I'm looking for is it communicates nothing. It communicates nothing. It says something happens and maybe the process ends or maybe something else happens. Not very useful. But if I click the validate button, I'm not sure you can read this, a little faint. It says validation is complete. No issues were found in the document. So this is very polite way of saying there's no errors. This is valid. This violates no rules of the BPMN spec. But it's not good BPMN. So there's this additional validation, method and style validation. And now you've got a bunch of errors here. And these errors basically have to do with missing labels. So that's a very common type of error. The BPMN spec does not require you to label anything. But method and style has rules about, well, you always need to label an activity. If you have more than one end event, you need to label them. You need these diamonds called gateways, need labels that can communicate a certain thing. So style rules are intended to not allow you to do this. So no, you need to provide the labels, the icons, the right shapes, the message flows to add meaning to your diagram. And so you can write down the style rules, and I've done that in books, the books that I've written. But it works much better when they are incorporated in a tool, like the Trisotech tool, as you just saw. So when they're implemented as rules that can be validated in the tool, that has two benefits. One is it improves the quality of your models, for sure. But a second, I would say even equally important benefit is it teaches you the rules. So when you start out, you say, oh, you know, is that a rule? Or you might look at your list of rules and apply it. But when you can validate in the tool and you see these red X's and you have to fix it, it takes only, you know, once or twice and you stop making that error. It teaches you the rules and it sort of subconsciously teaches you to create good BPMN. The basic principle of BPMN style is to use the available icons, labels, border styles to add meaning to your diagram. So here we have this exact same model on the left. This one, which is valid according to the spec, which has no meaning, and the exact same model on the right that has labels, has the type of activity it is, it has the message flows, the type of start event it is, has labels on the gateways, labels on the end events, who we're interacting with, the customer in this case, all of that stuff. So you want to use these, you know, relatively few visual clues that are allowed by the spec to add meaning to your models. That's pretty basic. All right, let's drill one level deeper here. So we talked about subprocesses, the thing that makes your models hierarchical. And we said it can be shown collapsed in your parent level diagram and expanded in the child level diagram. So there's this idea of process levels. A single model is not one diagram, but a tree or hierarchy of diagrams that have parent to child relationships. Now notice here in the child level diagram, I have two end events, these thick circles called end events. Just means that the child level, the subprocess ends. When it reaches one of these, it ends. So there's two of them here. Why are there two of them? Well, there could, because it would be legal to say we just take this arrow to this one, and we just have one of them. But method and style, these conventions say, no, you want two if there are two different ways that this subprocess could end. And we label the end event, in that case, with the name of the end state. The end state is noun adjective. How did this subprocess end? Successfully or in some exception end state? And these, now hold that thought. The diamond shapes in a process called gateway is like a switch. It says when the sequential arrives, we have a choice to make. Which path do we take? And as determined by some logic. Now the BPMN spec says that the gateway makes that choice by evaluating some bit of process data known to the process at that point. There's only one problem with that. Process data is typically not part of the process model. Process data is in the part of BPMN that's done by programmers in executable processes. So the BPMN standard really has no standard for data or expression languages that would be used in a gateway. So we're asking the modeler to put some kind of indication at the gateways based on information that they don't really have. What is the data? So method and style takes a bold step, and you might say too hard to even fathom, but it turns out that it's not so hard when you get used to it, that a gateway only does one thing. It tests the end state of the previous activity. So here the previous activity is called approve report, and it says there's two possible paths: report approved, report disapproved, where these labels represent end states, different ways this activity could end. And that's the only thing allowed by a gateway. The gateway tests the end state of the previous activity. That's a method and style convention, which is much more stringent than what the BPMN spec allows. And we label the outgoing sequence flows called the gates, either noun adjective to indicate the end state, or we label the gateway itself as a question, sort of the success end state with a question mark, and label the gates yes and no. Either of those are okay. Now let's combine that with the previous slide. Well, all right, so here we can see that this process has two end states, two end events. This is an order process, order complete or order failed. And this task called check credit has two end states. How do we know that? Because it's followed by a gateway with two gates, credit okay and bad credit. So there's two ways this could end. Similarly, the sub-process called fulfill order has two end states, fulfilled okay and out of stock. So each activity with multiple end states is followed by a gateway that splits the flow depending on which end state. So the number of end states is really, in an activity, it's the number of different next steps. So it says two different next steps, and you can go to the end or it can go to fulfill order. So this is a convention of method and style. Now, let me move this GoToMeeting thing out of the way. Here we see the labels. Here's the child level of fulfill order up here, this other diagram. And we can see that because it's followed by a gateway in the parent level with two gates, fulfilled okay and out of stock, these are the names of the end states of fulfill order. But we also know that when we expand fulfill order in the child level, each end state has its own end event labeled with the name of the end state. So two end states, fulfilled okay and out of stock. So there's this count matching, two end states, two gates, and label matching, fulfilled okay, out of stock, out of stock. So again, you may say, this is a lot of bother. Oh, and by the way, if you don't have these labels matching and you click method and style validation, it will give you an error. Say those labels didn't match. This is a style rule. So why do we do this? Because remember, what we want is to hand our stack of diagrams to somebody who does know the process and let them, by tracing from the top level diagram down to as much detail as they want to go, to understand exactly what's happening, even if they don't know your data, how the process works, your terminology. You know, maybe they're not a native English speaker, or there's French speaker, and the model's in English and they don't understand the terminology that well. By having these really mechanical cues linking, so, oh, out of stock or fulfilled, okay, what does that mean? Oh, when we go down the child level, we see, okay, those are the ones that take this path. Now I understand, because it uses these names. This path in the parent corresponds to this path in the child. So that's part of the mechanism of method and style. We said good BPMN is complete. And here's our model again. We said we want to know at a glance how the process starts, what the instance represents, its possible end states, and all its interactions with the outside world. Well, here we can see this process starts with a message called order to a message start event. So a method and style, you understand that a process with a message start event is started by an external request. The name of the message is the name of that request, and each instance of that process represents a different start message. So each order is a different instance of this process. This process has two ways it could end, either order complete, a success end state, or order failed. And I don't mean to suggest that every process or activity just has two end states. It could have one, it could have 10. That's kind of up to you. And its interactions with the customer, or receives an order and returns either an invoice or a failure notice. Those are all the interactions with the outside world. So you can tell that from a simple glance at this top level diagram. And now in a real process model, this might be a sub-process, and there might be other sub-processes. So there could be a lot of detail inside here, but these top level sort of ideas are easily visible at a glance. All right, so in summary, what is method and style? It's a disciplined approach to creating BPMN. Additional rules, additional methodology on top of the rules of the spec. And the spec has no methodology at all, but it does have rules. So additional rules and a methodology designed to ensure that your process models reveal the process logic correctly, according to the spec, clearly, completely, and consistently. And you need to understand that the value of the information in your process models is not like the cost of the tool. That's a tiny part of it. It's all those man hours of stakeholder workshops and meetings and interviews, and the subject matter experts, you have to take their time. That's expensive. So you need to capture that in a way that is a lasting digital asset that can be used by all the stakeholders and even by future stakeholders of other projects that would need to know how your process worked. So it preserves that value. It also creates business requirements for IT. So if IT is building some automation product for the process as a whole or for some part of the process, the models are part of those business requirements. And with flowcharts, they kind of look at your process diagram and more or less ignore it because it doesn't have the precision, and they kind of do what they want to do. With BPMN, the IT uses the same language, BPMN, as the modelers do. And if you follow method and style, you have this correct it's not only understandable, but it's correct and precise, so that the ultimate model used by IT, if they make an executable process, looks like just a more detailed version of the model that you created. They don't start new in a different language or totally different style of diagram. Most important, it gets your whole team on the same page. And I hear this from manager after manager, that the real value that they want out of their efforts is that everyone in the process modeling team, in fact, all the stakeholders, to be able to understand each other's models without having to wade through a long text document that explains it. You want the diagrams themselves to be self-explanatory. So if you follow this discipline, which requires no technical knowledge, it requires no modeling experience, it's really a set of principles and rules, you will be able to create consistently good BPMN. And this works best when it's supported by validation in the tool. So the Trisotech tool is excellent in that respect. As you saw, you click that style rule validation, it gives you the errors, and you fix those errors, and your models are better, and you learn the rules. So you get better. That's a great thing. All right, so how do you learn to do this? There's different ways to learn to do this. The least expensive is a book. Okay, so the BPMN Method and Style is sort of it's like 7 years old now. This is sort of like the Bible of BPMN, but it contains more information than you need, unless you're implementing a BPMN tool. If you want something that just shows the method and style, this is a relatively new one. BPMN Quick and Easy. It's very short. That's the least expensive way to do it. So if you learn things from books, I recommend this. But of course, it's hard to learn a language, which BPMN is, from reading a book. You want to have practice, exercises. So I created this app called BPMN Pro, which is, there's no lecture at all. It's the entire BPMN Method and Style training, so to speak, is through an app that just is a quiz questions, 400 quiz questions in a gamification-based app. You go through levels, and at the end, you learn method and style. No tools. It's all quiz questions. So that's a kind of a good way to do it too. But honestly, the best way to learn it is with training. And so we offer the BPMN Method and Style training in a variety of forms. They all have a mix of explanation, lecture, so to speak, and then exercises in class using a tool, using the Trisotech tool. Because you might think, oh, I understand this, and then you're given an exercise like a scenario, and then you're forced to actually draw those diagrams yourself, and you realize, maybe I didn't understand this quite as well as I thought. So it's by going through those exercises, then we discuss the answers, that's where you really learn to do it. So hands-on with the tool is absolutely essential. So we offer it, if you've got a group, live on site at your site, and then Trisotech offers it in Montreal at their home office. I have public live online classes. And again, for a group, you can have a private live online class. And then there's web on demand. So that's self-paced, recorded videos. So the content is the same, regardless of the format. So at your site, live online or on demand, the same slides, same exercises. And this is very important, post-class certification. So the training is a bit like drinking from the fire hose. So the on-site class is 2 full days, and the live online is 3 days, around 5 hours a day. So it's about 13 hours of instruction. It's a lot of material. and your head's kind of spinning at the end of it. So you will have heard everything you need to know to create good BPMN, but it won't have like sunk in yet. So built into the training is this post-class certification. So you have access to my Trisotech workspace for 60 days following the training. And the purpose of that access is to complete certification. Certification is based on a short exam, 10 questions. You need 80% to pass. That's just kind of the first hurdle. Make sure you kind of studied your notes. But then the real part of it is an exercise, a process model that you create using the tool, following the method and style conventions, and that I evaluate. And you get back from me one of two emails that says either, congratulations, is perfect, we marked you certified on the website. We have like 1,300 students certified listed on the website. Or more typically, the first time is, well, there's this problem, there's that problem, please fix and resubmit. And so it's not shameful to get that email, because that's where you really learn BPMN, by fixing your mistakes, because it focuses on the parts that you were a little shaky on. And when you fix it, amazingly, you don't make that mistake anymore. So this is really a key to success, is having this validation built in. So it's not, it's not an option, at least with my training. The training I deliver, it's built in, comes with it. I've got a slide on this, as I said. So 60 days, there's a short online exam, student exercise. It can be anything you want, but there's 4 required elements. You need to have one each of these 4 things. You need to follow the method and style conventions. You need to validate and fix all the errors before you submit it to me, and you iterate it until it's perfect. So this is really the best way to learn method and style. And I think I skipped this on this page here. So in the slides, you can get a copy of the slides. Not sure if we're sending them out automatically or how that's going to work, but the link to the, here's the link to the on-demand training. Here's the link to the live online training, and there's a discount code. The next class is May 22nd, 23rd, 24th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern time each day. Here's the registration link, and there's a discount code, 10% off with this discount code webinar. You put that in the checkout page, you get 10% off. So hopefully some of you will be motivated to think about doing this training. So this is self-paced. As soon as you register and I send you a link to the videos and enroll you in my Trisotech workspace, you can stop and go at your own pace. And this one, is actually at a fixed date and time. All right, well, that concludes what I have to say. And I guess we can take some questions. So
yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Bruce. So yeah, we have still a few minutes left. So let's go with the first one, because that's a popular one that we get, and I'm sure you get this one all the time. So there's that popular claim that BPMN is too cryptic for the majority of process optimization project stakeholders. So can you just shoot us a few of your arguments for the contrary?
Okay, so I mean, people argue that BPMN is too complicated, and what they really mean is there's too many shapes and symbols. And actually, there's only 3 basic shapes: the activity, the gateway, and the event, the round rectangle, the diamond, and the circle. But there's all these different icons and markers and border styles that all have specific meaning. And it's true, there are too many of those. So the first thing, and I didn't even mention that, is that you want to narrow the vocabulary to the shapes that you need to know. And that kind of goes without saying almost, so that we teach you, for example, events. The different triggers inside the circle. I think there's 13 different triggers. Well, there's only 3 that you need to know: timer, message, and error. And even error, you don't really need to know. So there's 2. So we didn't even teach the others. I mean, I used to teach a lot more, but now I realize you don't need to know that. There's lots of different types of gateways, but we only teach 4, and they have specific meaning, and 90% of the time you're just using this one. So with this disciplined approach, first of all, you cut down the number of shapes in the vocabulary. And second, there's a very particular way to use it that we teach you. So, you know, I think people that, you know, learn BPMN from some free information on the web, which basically just copied the spec and gives you the full vocabulary, it's kind of overwhelming. So the discipline cuts down the vocabulary, gives you a particular usage pattern for each of the shapes, and so it's a very finite subset. So you know, I think it becomes a usable thing, and in some of the student exercises, I'll sometimes get diagrams that contain some of these things that we don't cover in class, and I usually will say, don't use that.
Right.
Don't use that. It's not out of the range of things you should be using.
So you don't need to know the whole 500 pages spec document to use BPMN. All right.
Most of it was, I mean, when it was developed, people didn't really know what would be the most useful things. And also they wanted it to be executable on an engine, so it had to handle every possibility. Most people creating BPMN models are not trying to execute it on an engine. They're just trying to document or improve their processes, not automate them.
Right.
And so you don't need all that stuff.
Okay, thank you. Second question, and I don't know if you have a slide or any content about this, but I like this question. What is the impact of DMN and CMMN, the other standards, on a BPMN model?
So this is really I would say emerging area.
Yeah.
Because BPMN predated those 2 standards. So DMN is for decision modeling, business rules, and CMMN is for case management, which is a sort of unstructured processes. And so the links between these standards are, I would say, a little vague in the spec, but it's a good thing to use them together. So with DMN, there's a particular shape, and actually I think I have an example of it in one of these diagrams here. See if I can find it. Is it here? No. Hang on, I will find it. Here. Okay. So this shape here in BPMN is technically it's called a business rule task. And today we'd call it a decision task. And today we would interpret it as meaning execute a DMN decision. So pass the data required to check the credit to a decision model using DMN. They would take that data passed by this activity, execute the logic, which is defined in this other language called DMN, and return the result being either bad credit or credit okay to this task. So that requires, to do that for real, I would say, requires a common data language and expression language shared by BPMN and DMN. And DMN has a data and expression language called feel. BPMN does not, as I mentioned. They delegate that to the programmers and use whatever you want. So Trisotech, to its credit, has kind of taken the lead by saying, well, we use feel in our BPMN models. And there's a way to include that in your BPMN model so that linking this activity, business rule task, to the decision model is much more natural in the way Trisotech does it. But kind of like method and style, that's not baked into the standard. That's just perceiving a need in the marketplace to bring these together and adding that extra piece that's required. So in the DMN training, actually the BPMN training as well, we talk about how to integrate decision models and these business rule tasks in both the BPMN training and the DMN training. CMMN, I don't have those links built into the training, but again, in a case, you've got, within an unstructured case, you might have bits which are structured processes. So a case should be able to start a regular process, and a process should be able to start a case. And I believe that's another area where Trisotech has taken the lead in doing that integration. It's not part of my training, but I'd say that's an emerging area of the standards.
Right, definitely. Thank you very much. I think we have time for one last question. There's about 2 minutes left. So we have someone here asking to go back over the validation of BPMN model and just show a little bit how this works. I know you went over quickly during the session, but if you can just go back a little bit.
Well, so all right. So I'm not sure I was prepared for this, but let me see if I can just find let me find a student model. And I have no idea what this one is.
Okay.
But so this one might be okay. So these are, remember, the certification models. So if I click valid, now I ask students to validate before they submit to me. So probably this will be valid. This is valid and style rule validations. Okay, so here's a case where they validated against the rules of the spec. So the spec has certain rules, and Trisotech validate button checks that. But there's this other style validation. And so here it says, okay, so remember I said a gateway tests the end state of the preceding activity. And the rule is actually that the gateway must be preceded by an activity. This is actually kind of a funny thing because there's another rule that sort of conflicts with it, but that's what that's about. And then this one says, and it's basically the same kind of funny thing. It says a subprocess with multiple non-error end states must be followed by this gateway. So both of these errors are complaining about the fact that there's this, what's called an OR join, which is in between the subprocess and the gateway, because the rules of method and styles they're very mechanical. And so in this case, I might have said, well, this is a special case, so this is okay. Or you could actually model it a way that using what's called an auxiliary end state. Get rid of this. And let me see what that does. I mean, I'm not sure what it would do. It still has some error here.
Okay.
But this has this idea that the end state, condition cleared, condition declined. So it checks this I think this says denied and the other said declined. So it checks that these labels match the end states. So that's basically how it works. It's very mechanical. You might
Yep.
say it's too strict, but it teaches you the rules.
Okay. So you can work around your errors and find, the
Right.
way.
And then the students can, if there's something that says, you've got these rules in conflict, what do I do? They send me email. So I'm also during the 60 days, I'm kind of your free BPMN consultant on these sort of fine points.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very, very much, Bruce, for today, and thank you everyone that's still in the room right now. Like I said, I will be sending you an email with all the details, with Bruce's information and stuff. I know that some of you um, asked me to provide the links for Bruce's website and to register to the training. So I'll do just that. And for those of you that we didn't have time to answer the questions, we'll try to do it by email as fast as possible. So again, thank you very much, Bruce, and everyone have a nice day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.